Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a show that aims to provide hope and avenue for healing, and one that will hopefully help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have a fascinating guest. He's got a wonderful story. Bob Trussell is a businessman from Lexington, Kentucky. He was involved in the thoroughbred horse business for years. During the recession, it took a big hit. He was searching for answers as to what to do and where to go. And because of this, he turned to God, which many of us don't do in times of need, it seems. But through his French horse trainer and Swedish horse chiropractic friends, he was introduced to an entrepreneur who claimed to have the world's greatest mattress. Bob obtained North American rights for the product, which became known as Tempur-Pedic. 10 years later, he rang the New York Stock Exchange bell and the business went public. He and his wife, Martha, have 3 children, 1 grandchild. And today we're going to discuss his book. It's available at Sophia Institute, SOPHIA Institute.com. It's called Logic That God Exists, a handbook of belief in God through simple reason to bring you peace. Many people seem to be not believing in God these days, less and less. Mr. Trussell, welcome to Mercy Unbound, and surely appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for the opportunity.
Just to start out with our terms, you reference God in your book. You're speaking of a personal Judeo-Christian God, as commonly understood from Scripture, but you're not speaking of a higher power, the New Age energy, a lot of
Right.
peripheral things, I guess. So you're speaking of God.
Right.
Right.
When I decided to write the book, it was about belief in the traditional Judeo-Christian God, and the title, "The Logic That God Exists," doesn't fully explain that. So I wanted to mention that right away in the book, that's who we're talking about here. We're talking about the God of the Bible.
Now, in chapter 1, you said it's titled Everything Just Happened by Itself. So you spoke of a mathematician and gave some numbers and calculated the odds of life randomly forming. Share with us what you found and what the numbers were like.
Yeah, the thing that struck me the most and about our culture is that there's an underlying assumption that literally everything just happened by itself. And that's what you see in the media and academia and Hollywood and government. And everywhere you look, there's this subliminal kind of message that God isn't real because everything just happened by itself. And the first thing I address is the mathematical impossibility of that happening, because if there was a random event called the Big Bang, if those atoms that were set forth were truly without a guiding hand, if they were random, the odds of them forming the first amino acid and the first protein are astronomically uh, impossible. And that's the opinion not of me. I'm not a mathematician, but top mathematicians have said that there just hasn't been enough time for that to accidentally happen. So it had to have a higher power, or a creator, um, uh, uh, in charge of that. It just couldn't have happened.
You gave a story about analogy of graveyards. Could you share that with
Yeah,
us?
yeah. Uh, one one scientist said, or mathematician said, that the odds of the first amino acid being formed and then further a protein being formed by itself is similar to the odds of a blowing up a graveyard and having the debris come down and forming a working space shuttle. And I said that one time to an atheist, and he said, "Well, if you blow up enough graveyards, I say that's where we disagree. I don't care how many graveyards you blow up, that will never happen, and that is patently obvious to anybody could see that that can't happen.
In chapter 3, you talk about, and I think this has gone into our culture, that science either has the answers to everything or they're going to have the answers. And all the miracles we're going to talk about later in the Catholic Church that we know and love, science can't explain it now, and I don't think they ever will. But um, you talk about philosophy and theology, people believe they're meaningless. In your opinions, does science really have all these answers of
No,
how life came
science
to?
no science has scientific answers, but what's happening in the culture is that people use science to discredit philosophy and theology. They say that since we through science have learned that the Earth is older than we thought, and that the man was here older than we thought, it means the Bible's silly and meaningless. And it's that's not true. Science definitely has value, but so does philosophy and theology. And so you can't say that one is all there is and the other two are worthless. And that's what the culture is doing.
I just read last week, I believe it was, that further testing on the Shroud of Turin, the new technology showed it to be time right around the time of Jesus. And it was interesting. The old technology said it was not. And so faith at times can prove science almost, and science can prove faith, but they got to work together. And it's not all science.
They got to, and that's the funny thing that people put so much weight in science, which is always changing. They're always discovering this, as you just said, something new, and so that is changing. Whereas religion and philosophy don't change much. And really, if you think about it, the biblical uh, story of how we came to be is the only coherent one. Because if once you get away from that, then you're rudderless as far as the how and the why that we are here, and you get off track into things like the multiverse, which is saying, okay, well, there wasn't enough time for that to happen here, but what if there were trillions of universes? Then we're just that lucky one where the accident happened. No, because who created the millions or trillions of universes? It's circular logic, and they accuse us of circular logic by using the Bible to prove Jesus and God. But they're the ones who do that. I'm just trying to shine the light on this.
You made a good point too about does science have an answer as to why this happened? Um,
Right, right. Science has no answer. It's beyond the bounds of science, and yet they try and use it. And just from an elementary logical standpoint, matter and energy cannot create themselves, even by scientific principle. And so that is right there is something that anybody can understand. And often it seems that some of the some of the least of us understand it more than the seemingly the most intelligent don't get it. Uh, that's kind of strange.
I think scripture even talks about that, though. The foolish will shame the wise.
Right,
Uh,
exactly.
Another part of the book I enjoyed was you mentioned about science doesn't talk about the soul. And we as Christians believe, we're really spiritual beings living temporarily in a material body. But I remember as a kid, the old Baltimore Catechism, why were you created? To know and love and serve God in this world and be with him in the next. Science can't, they don't have any thoughts on that or understanding or explanation. of that, do they?
Right. Science doesn't, and that's okay if they stick to the science. But what's happening is people are using science the against the idea of a God, and what there are is they're materialists. They're all they everything is only what you can touch and feel, which is really crazy because we all know that there's radio waves and microwaves and things, all sorts of things that we can't see that we know are there. And so to deny the existence of a spiritual world completely it makes no sense. It is it is a desperation of logic.
That's a really good point because they believe in those things, but not in a God because we can't see it, taste it, touch it, and whatever.
Yeah,
Um, you also made a good point about the laws of nature. But who wrote the laws? Who wrote the rules? They didn't
that's
just happen.
that's the point. And so when the universe started in the Big Bang, and the fact that it had a beginning, that means it's not eternal. Only God is eternal. Eternal is always was and always will be. Infinite is that had a beginning. And so the laws of nature um, are constant over the whole universe. So they're here on Earth, and by science, we know that it's the same laws of nature acting everywhere in the universe. Well, why would that be if it was random? Why would these laws be so hard and fast? They're rules. It's a, and many scientists and mathematicians have said, you know, there it shouldn't have happened. That there are these laws, hard and fast. You know, water boils at 212 degrees and freezes at 32. Why? Someone made those rules. It just couldn't have happened by itself.
In one section, you talked about the laws of probability and they cast out that these basic amino acids, as I learned in medical school, uh, were necessary for life, and they lined up. And you talked about specific statistics, and share with us the comments about the 20 people sitting at a dinner table because the numbers were astronomical.
Yeah, yeah, and this really floored me when I first read it. Um, at first, really thought it through. Uh, if you have a dinner party with 20 people and you wanted to arrange the seating chart in a certain way, how many different combinations do you think that there are of of people people sitting in different places? And the answer is 2 million trillion. So we had 20 people over for Thanksgiving one year, and we were having a hard time getting the seating chart together. And then now I know why. there's there's 2 million trillion, and people say, "Oh, come on, Bob, that's not true." But no, it's 20 factorial. You can multiply it out by yourself: 20 times 19 times 18, etc. And so to make an amino acid, you don't have a party of 20. You need at least 100 um, atoms arranged in a certain way for that to work. So it's not 20 factorial, it's 100 factorial. And when you multiply that out, there are more zeros than there are atoms in the universe. It just could not have happened. It is impossible for it to happen without a guiding hand.
You know, as a physician, I'm so amazed, and people don't understand this because they think the science is going to figure all this out, but the human body is so incredible. Um, just think in embryology, the fetus is forming, and what what tells a simple cell is so complex we don't even understand it. But what makes a liver cell go up here to the liver and a brain cell go up here to form the brain? There's a code.
The code,
It's a
yeah.
lot more than just a couple amino acids code. And that in itself is probably trillion, trillion, trillion. And yet it's a complex code, but somebody had to write this code.
somebody had to write the code. And the example I use is the iPhone, which everyone's so familiar with. Everyone knows that it took thousands of programmers to write the iPhone code. And uh, but if you look at our DNA, it's 4 character digital code. It's in a way quite similar, only way more complex than an iPhone. And yet we're supposed to believe that that just happened by itself. And again, it's impossible. So all of these things prove God. And and we haven't even mentioned Jesus yet. And we'll get to that because that's later in the book. But these things are all uh, easy to understand. And one reason I wrote the book was because I've read, other books. There are obviously other books on the subject, but I noticed that a lot of them are so complex. Like I try to read Thomas Aquinas, you got to read every paragraph like 10 times
Right.
before it sinks in. And so I wanted to put something in plain language. You don't need to be Thomas Aquinas to understand that there has to be a God.
Well, we're discussing, and we got more to share here, but we're discussing Bob Trussell's book on the logic that God exists. It's available at sophiainstitute.com. You mentioned Blaise Pascal, uh, and it kind of reminded me of the song "Playing Cards." Know when to hold them, know when to fold them. But what did he say, and who was he, and what comments did he make about all this?
Blaise Pascal was a famous French mathematician and philosopher, and he was one of the most respected uh, people of his day. And he invented something called Pascal's wager, which basically says that if you um, are wondering if there is a God, and if you are a betting man, you would always bet that there is a God because if it turns out that there is none, you're none the worse for it. But if it turns out that there is, you've got eternity in the balance. And so that is a kind of a famous thing. And what I say in the book is if all the arguments that we're making about the DNA and about the laws of nature and about um, the impossibility of it all, even if you refute all of that somehow, well, somehow it's all wrong, Bob, uh, then at least you should acknowledge Pascal's wager, because what you're really doing is you're acknowledging that you don't know, and that therefore, if you don't know, it might be true. So you should err on that side because you're you have eternity in the balance, which is your most precious thing.
I don't know about you, but as I'm getting up there in years, it's like, where's all the time gone? And
Oh yeah, yeah, it
here and
goes
gone,
by.
and eternity's forever. Um,
Attorneys forever, and that's one thing. When people say that they don't believe in God, there's 3 reasons why they don't. Normally, is that number one is the what C.S. Lewis calls the problem of pain. People say, well, if there was a loving God out there, why would this happen? Why would he allow this happen and that to happen? And my answer to that is, if you look at it in the realm of eternity, our lives down here are very short, and so we're here. And say, would you take this deal? If you would, you have 30 seconds of pain for uh, 70 years of bliss and no pain, and you would say, yeah, that'd be a great deal. I'd do that all the time. Well, eternity is way more than 70 years. So we have some pain in this life, some more than others, and some lives are longer than others. But in the end, it must be viewed in the uh, uh, proximity of eternity, and that's when it all starts to make some sense. Yeah, people have to go through some stuff, and why? It's because, well, we rejected our Creator, and that's when you get in more into the biblical part of this. But the first part of the book is just trying to look at it from a logical reason and mathematical. viewpoint.
It's amazing to me that people today some believe that Jesus was a mythical figure. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, we tell time based upon Jesus. I mean, for Pete's sakes, and there's all sorts of extra biblical sources that prove that he was a real figure. That to me is the most spurious claim that people try to make.
you mentioned those three barriers and pain. I hear that even in my own family. Why would God allow this? But yet it does allow us an opportunity to draw closer to Him if we allow it. But you mentioned hiddenness and busyness. Share with us each one of those, your thoughts.
Right. The other reason I think is because God is hidden and it's out of sight, out of mind. And we wonder, I've heard people say, well, if there's such a God, why doesn't he show himself? Why does he come down here and do godlike things and do grandiose things? And I say, well, he did. he he did. He came down here and he did miracle after stunning miracle after miracle. He did godlike things. He raised the dead. He healed the blind. Um, and he forgave sins. I mean, he did it. He did everything you would ever expect a God to do. And so um, then sometimes they say, well, that was 2,000 years ago. What about now? He's hidden now, and and then you can just point out that his followers are 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 today, the miracles are still happening that are mentioned in the Bible. If you All you gotta do is look at the Marian apparitions around the world for hundreds of years, unbelievable, spectacular miracles of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the miracle of the sun in Fatima. There's all sort, uh, the un, undefiled bodies. I forget the name of it.
Incorrupt, yeah.
Incorrupted,
Yeah.
the incorrupt bodies on display in churches throughout Europe. These are miracles that are modern day, and they're signs that Jesus is with us and God is real.
I'll share a personal story. A few years ago, I was speaking out in San Diego, and one of the speakers was Dr. Castanon Gomez. Well, Gomez was the scientist who was involved in studying a Eucharistic miracle in Argentina in the early 1990s. And he was an avowed atheist.
Mm.
And he couldn't wait to get his hands on this host, consecrated Catholic host, because it had red spots on it, and he wanted to prove that this was fake. Well, he ended up sending it to New York, um, didn't tell the very well-known, highly respected pathologist there. He didn't give a history of what it was, who it was from, or what. Had a call a few weeks later, and the doctor said, Dr. Gomez, you never gave a history on the patient. It says, it looks to me under the microscope that this patient had suffered great trauma and that
Mhm.
he actually was alive at the time this biopsy was taken. Can you
Mhm.
give me a history? And that's when Dr. Gomez said, well, it came from a consecrated Catholic host and it was human heart tissue, which, like the other miracles, is just an example of God's love for us. Dr.
Yeah.
Gomez is now a devout consecrated Catholic, and
Wow, that's great.
science did not win that one.
There's
And
the word science proved God there. I mean,
yeah,
they try to use it the opposite way, but often it can be used to prove God.
and I'd really encourage anybody who doesn't know the miracles you mentioned, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Fatima, Lourdes, all the apparitions, Cabejo, Africa, to study it because they, science can't explain it. And they couldn't explain this Eucharistic miracle either. Um, I want to move on to a little different miracle, one that you had in your own life. I certainly, when I saw you was a CEO of Tempur-Pedic,
Yeah.
uh, I know that. That's a common household name in mattresses, you
Yeah.
know. And and yet you had your own rough times in life, didn't you?
Yeah, I really did. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I went to Santa Monica Grade School, Dominican High School, and Marquette University. So I was formed by uh, Franciscans, Dominicans, and Jesuits. But when I got out of college, I drifted away like a lot of my compatriots, and I got into the racehorse business, and and that was a great thing. I was very fortunate in that. I moved to Kentucky. I met my wife here, Martha, and things were sailing along great. I was in various aspects of the business. And then we hit a really bad recession in the late 1980s. And the horse market kind of went poof, and I went poof. I had horse loans and I couldn't pay off, and everybody owed everybody else money. And the joke was, if somebody could come up with one person could come up with $10,000, it would pay $1 million in bills, because I would pay person B and he would
Yeah.
pay C, and it would go all the way around back to me. But nobody could come up with 10 grand. And so I was in a tough spot. I was married, 40 years old, two little kids, and no job, deep in debt. And I kind of fell back on my Catholic roots, and I started going to weekday mass. And I just told God, I just said, you know, Lord, I don't know what to do, and I'm open to suggestions. And you know what? It doesn't necessarily have to be in in my beloved horse business. I'm open to whatever, but I'm in a jam. I need to support my family, and so I I kind of put on an attitude of, after those prayers, I expected them to be answered. And so anything that came my way, I thought it was the answer to the prayer. It was providential. And so I started several businesses that failed. Uh, uh, and then, but I mean, two or three businesses at least that failed. And then the fourth guy came and he told me that he met somebody in who knows a Swedish horse chiropractor who knows a guy who claims to make the world's greatest mattress, and he suggested that I go see this guy. His name was Michael Magnuson, uh, and so I did. I said, I got on a plane. I said, this might be it. So I went to Sweden, and I met him, and I slept at his house and stayed on, you know, on a mattress. I thought it was the most unbelievable product I'd ever experienced. And uh, I told him, I asked him, what are you doing? He said, well, we're just launching it now in Sweden, and we want to go worldwide. And so I said, I want to, I'll do it in the States. He said, well, we don't have anybody in America, so go home and write me a marketing plan and we'll see. So I did. I went home and I wrote the world's greatest or world's worst marketing plan. Our idea was we were going to sell it in the back of truck stops, and you know, because it was only 3 inches thick at the time, and we are going to put it in the sleeper cabin back there. And we didn't sell any of that, but he ended up giving me exclusive North American distribution rights to the products, and then uh, I had to sell 10,000 mattresses the first year to maintain exclusivity. Uh, that's how he protected himself. But I wasn't. We didn't do very well. We only sold 70 mattresses that year, so we missed the goal by 9,930. But we had developed a working relationship, and the next year the thing started just started taking off. And that was the answer to my prayer. And 10 years later, I'm CEO of $1 billion company. We're ringing the bell in the New York Stock Exchange.
I had a couple questions that came up while you were explaining. How did you get in the horse business? I mean, there are not a lot of horses in Milwaukee, are there?
No, no. My dad bought a riding horse when I was 11, and he was 40 something. And so we learned to ride together. And we had a uh, we had a trade publication called the Chronicle of the Horse, which is about hunters and jumpers, which is what we were learning. And the last page in the inside back cover was about the racing roundup. So I found myself every week going to the racing roundup. I just got hooked on horse racing as a sport. I was a sports nut, and this became like my favorite sport. And so that's what got me into the initial interest. And when I graduated from Marquette, my dad said, I said, "What should I do?" He said, "Follow your dream," because he was in the war, World War II. He was a bombardier, and he was never able to follow. He wanted to be an engineer. He said, "I couldn't because of the war. I got married, I had kids, and it's never happened." He said, "Follow your dream." I said, "Okay." So I went out to Belmont Park in New York, started walking hots at the racetrack there. That was my dream, and that's what followed. That's what led me on the path to where we are now.
One other question was, what was your major in high school, and did that help you in the Tempur-Pedic business?
My major in college was finance.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I was always kind of a numbers guy, and high school was kind of the same. Yeah, numbers and math and science and that kind of thing.
Any words, in closing that you give to people who are out there struggling with their faith or don't believe in God, or, you've seen rough times, and
Yeah, yeah. I think I think that people should be aware of the forces that are out there trying to make them not believe. And I think that in order, I mean, everyone's different. Some people are just knocked over by a revelation. For me, I was uh, a numbers guy, and the logic is what made it for me. Is just the understanding that this all we see couldn't have happened by itself. It had to have a guiding hand, and if it did have a guiding hand, what does that mean? What does that mean to us? And what does the Bible mean? And I was just, I had a real moment where I asked myself, well, do you believe what you were taught or not in 16 years of Catholic school? And I know a lot of people I knew a lot of friends didn't. Uh, but I think it wasn't that they didn't believe, is that they were put off by people or teachers or none they didn't like or something, and they had a reason other than the logic. If you start off with the building blocks of the reason, and I believe that faith, the culture would want to tell you faith, oh, that's just blind faith. It's not blind faith. It's based upon reason, and it would have to be based upon reason. That that there is a God, because all this could not have happened by itself. The laws of nature, the DNA of our bodies, um, and that He has revealed Himself in spectacular ways. Um, and that is, I would just ask them to consider that, and to kind of start from the ground up, and not expect it to be knocked over with faith. A lot of times, it's not. A lot of people. I've never had one of those kind of experiences. It's just been a steady connection that I've always felt, and I've fallen back on reason, and that has led me to the Bible, which we haven't even talked about that much, but that's where the tremendous evidence is of Jesus. Jesus proves God because He was godlike, and He said He was God. So if Jesus was God, then there is a God too. That's the other way to prove it.
one last question. You mentioned one of the third detriment was busyness. Now,
Yes.
you've been very successful as a businessman. Mother Teresa used to talk about how our financial success can be a detriment at times because we're spending so much time working in, figuring out our financial status and keeping it in this. And do you find that as a struggle, or have you conquered that?
I think it's always a struggle to because we're always it's easy to get immersed in secular stuff of the world, and the busyness thing though comes hand in hand with uh, the the real reason I think people uh, don't believe often is that it changes what you do. It changes your life. it changes it, and they feel you're restricted in some ways, and you can't do this, and right away, oop, there's the 10 Commandments coming into focus here, and so people don't want that. People don't want to be, and they hide from that, and I think they build up excuses to not believe sometimes because they really don't want to change, and that is part of the busyness.
You know, in my own life, had my downs and had to find my way back through the Lord. And it was a point in my life where I said, my gosh, what my mom and dad taught me as a little kid was true. And I just wonder if you felt that same way too, you being raised by a good Catholic family.
Yes, for sure. And my mom was very strong, and she converted my dad. And I remember when I drifted away in my 20s, I would come home and she want me to go to mass, and I go, well, I don't want to go over that church over there with all those strangers and sing songs I don't know and all this stuff. And she just stuck to her guns, and boy, and now I look back and she was right. I just thought I said I could find God on the golf course, and all that's a cop out because you really can't. That's why it's a commandment that we go to church once a week at least, that we go to mass, because God knows that we will be strayed by the secular side, and our lives are busy, and that's why we go there. And a lot of people say, "Well, I didn't get anything out of it," and the point is that's not the point. The point is you're not supposed to get anything out of it. You might, but you're going there to give thanks and praise to God for all the blessings that He's given us through in our lives. Our parents used to say, "Count your blessings." That was so true, and it's something that we should do now more and more.
That's certainly so. Well, people, we've been discussing the logic that God exists, available at sophiainstitute.com. Robert Trussell's the author. Bob, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on Mercy Unbound, and keep up the great work and enjoy your grandchild.
Yes,
And
thank you.
hope to see you back sometime soon on Mercy Unbound. People, I hope you enjoy the show. Please subscribe and share. It's a great story, and continue to love the Lord with your heart and mind and soul and body. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/drbrian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.